And hello and welcome for this edition of the Health Research Report, this 8th of March 2013. We have 4 articles today. First article is going to be toxic metals associated, or at least found, at higher levels in children of autism. Number 1. Number 2, the reason you get tired during exercise. Guess what? It's not because necessarily your muscles are exhausted or depleted of energy. It has to do with the neurotransmitter in the brain, and you'll be surprised which one. Number 3, lipid researcher, 98 years old, says that dietary cholesterol is not responsible for heart disease. When they say he's age 98, that's supposed to correlate with how many years the guy has actually been researching cholesterol, and he knows the stuff. Number 4, BPA. Obviously sucks. Well, it sucks for an entire new reason for kids too, which could explain the reason why asthma levels begin to increase. Start with number 1. Study finds higher levels of several toxic metals in children with autism. Produced, or I should say, released in the Journal of Biological Trace Element Research. And what they discovered was this: that the autism group of children had significantly higher levels of certain metals, which the research has been trying to say for a long period of time. Something's off. Now, whether it's the genetics that cause the higher level of metals, or are the metals responsible for the autism itself? So does autism cause the higher levels, or does the metals cause the autism? Well, that's a good question, but this is what they did discover, and this will blow you away. They looked at the metal in the red blood cells. They had basically, as far as lead is concerned, 74% more than a child that did not have autism. Thallium, 77% more. Tin, 115% more than a child who did not have autism. Tungsten, 44%. And again, this was published in the Journal of Biological Trace Element Research. What they looked at, the statistical analysis of the toxic metals were also associated with the autism severity. I mean, the higher level of metals, the worse the autism. They also discovered too, and I regret they did not mention the levels, probably because of so much political backlash in regards to it, but they did say, but they didn't release the amounts, that the severity of autism is also related to the higher levels of cadmium and mercury. So the more those metals were in the system, the worse the autism. Interesting, because cadmium is really a byproduct of a lot of different things. Remember cadmium when they came to the imports from China coming in, where they made the metals look shiny and they were all exposed to toxic cadmium? And also mercury, because mercury exposure is all across the board. Sometimes in vaccinations, sometimes not. Which makes you think, because high fructose corn syrup, remember a few shows back, deactivated peroxidase enzyme number 1. Now PO1 enabled the children or people to get rid of these toxic metals. Since high fructose corn syrup deactivates peroxidase 1, that's how it may also be relating to causing autism. Maybe more than just one piece of the puzzle, but all the puzzle pieces are beginning to come together. Now, we're just thinking enough. The doctors did the research, used something called DMSA also. Now, what DMSA is what's called the chelating agent. It's used to drive or pull toxic metals out of the body. They showed that the children with the highest levels of toxic metals benefited the most from DMSA. Meaning DMSA reduced the severity of the autistic symptoms. So something to think about. There are some treatments out there. If you're willing to get a doctor to test the levels of these metals in the blood, they'd be kind of cool. And try a little bit of DMSA. Whatever's going to make it easier for the children, why not? It's not toxic. And this, again, it's shown before that DMSA seems to improve the symptoms in these autistic children. Number 2. Why your brain tires when exercising. It is not necessarily because your muscles expend all their energy. Well, guess what? It is due to serotonin, and not the lack of serotonin. It's actually due to the excess amount of serotonin. Now back to the article. It's called Central Fatigue. And read their quote. Our discovery is helping to shed the light on the paradox been long subject to discussion by researchers. It says, we have always known that the neurotransmitter serotonin is released when you exercise, and indeed it helps you keep you going. However, the big however, the answer to our role the substance plays in relation to the act while we feel exhausted, we have to stop been eluding us for years. We can now see it is actually a surplus of serotonin that triggers a braking mechanism in the brain. In other words, this is their quotes, serotonin functions as an accelerator but also as a brake when the strain becomes excessive, said Associate Professor Jean-François Perrier. I'm sorry about the butchering the name. From the Department of Neuroscience and Pharmacology, who has spearheaded the new research. Also said another caveat too. For all those you out there who think the antidepressants are somehow going to make you feel better. But if you can't figure out why you're feeling fatigued, it may not be because it's you naturally. It may be just too much of a good thing as far as that antidepressant. Stay back to quote. For selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, which are used as antidepressants, we can possibly help explain why those who take the drug often feel more tired and become slightly clumsier than other people. What we now know can help us develop better drugs. So, if someone on antidepressants is not exactly feeling the most energetic or they feel tired, now remember, they're selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, meaning over time the serotonin levels begin to build and build and build because it's inhibiting the reuptake. So it's kind of like plugging a drain. So initially, a person on antidepressants, when they get past this up to this 3-month period, may end up feeling really good. Then all of a sudden, nothing is done to remove that plug from the drain. So the serotonin levels begin to build. And they become more and more and more and more fatigued as time goes on. Time to think of a different treatment option. That's all caveat emptor. Alright. Lipid researcher in 98 reports on the dietary cause of heart disease. Now this gentleman's only been doing cholesterol research for 6 decades. So majority of his life he's been doing it on dietary cholesterol, on which he comes to the conclusion, which would be the exact opposite most governments of the world have been telling you. Dietary cholesterol has nothing to do with heart disease. In fact, it may actually be healthy for your heart. What he is claiming is the frying of food, reused oils, polyunsaturated fats, and smoking. By doing this, oxidizes the cholesterol, causing something to occur which is called an oxysterol. He says the oxidized lipids contribute to heart disease, both by increasing deposition of the calcium in the arterial wall, a major hallmark of arteriosclerosis. Kumaro is the gentleman's name. And also he said too, he and his colleagues first reported in 2001 that the artery people who had bypass operations had elevated levels of something called Sphingomyelin, one of the several phospholipids, or phosphate-containing lipids, that make up membranes of all cells. The bypass patients also had significantly more oxidized cholesterol. Interesting, because a while ago they found that vitamin C and vitamin E prevented the oxidizing of cholesterol, which obviously they tell you don't need. Unless you're actually manufacturing food, which will actually find vitamin E actually added to the fats to prevent them from oxidizing on the store shelves. But, gosh forbid, you should take it to prevent your body from oxidizing cholesterols in your own body. Interesting. Well, I go back to some Merck studies a long time ago when they did on vitamin E and said it didn't work. Alright. In the plasma tissues in the people who are not diagnosed with heart disease, he had already found that the arteries, and this is too, when looking at a newborn, they wanted to look at basically this one item called Sphingomyelin. In a newborn, only 10% of basically the plasma, or that's basically found in the arteries, contains Sphingomyelin, and 50% of it contains phosphatidylcholine. Now, phosphatidylcholine is normally healthy, but when introducing a large amount of oxidized cholesterol, trans fats, polyunsaturated fats, cooked oils, and things along those lines, they found out it changed the composition, which meant in bypass patients, they had 40% sphingomyelin and 27% phosphatidylcholine, which is interesting. So think about this. Instead of testing your cholesterol levels, won't they just test your sphingomyelin levels? Compare it to your phosphatidylcholine levels. Your new LDL and HDL of the future may be sphingomyelin and phosphatidylcholine, which make a lot more sense. So, by any chance, if your sphingomyelin levels are elevated and you have a lot of oxidized cholesterol in your body, things can be done to remove those polyunsaturated, cooked or rancid oils or transfigured oils out of your diet. Do a lot better for heart disease than a lot of these drugs that do nothing but cause your muscles to fall apart. Think about that. Sphingomyelin. Again, the guy's only got 6 decades of experience. So, weigh it out compared to the other medical professionals out there. And back to BPA. When is this stuff going to go away? What the heck is it still doing out there? Pay the companies to stop producing it. Buy the companies outright. Pay off the stockholders. It would save tremendous amount of money in health and reduction of environmental damage, period. Get these guys a way out and get this stuff gone. What they discovered in the journal of, or I should say published, in the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology was that just basic exposure to BPA caused asthma in kids. Going to their study. BPA's components on plastics found on food, can liners, store receipts, far more than even that. You're surrounded by it. Another article not too long ago, they said you couldn't even avoid BPA even if you went diet went organic because it's so prevalent in the environment. After adjusting for secondhand smoke and other factors known to be associated with asthma, the researcher found that postnatal exposure to BPA was associated with increased risk of wheeze and asthma. BPA exposure in the 3rd trimester. Before it used to be the 2nd trimester. Now it's 3rd trimester. Pregnancy was inversely associated with a risk of wheeze. Increased risk of wheeze and asthma was seen as being fairly routine. Low dose exposure to BPA, low dose. Not this massive dose. Say, oh, BPA can only hurt you if you consume tons over time. No. Any exposure to BPA. It says Donahue, like most other scientists studying BPA, we do not see a straightforward linear dose response relationship. This is much like smoking. It's just an exposure issue. More than 90% of the children in the study had detectable levels of BPA metabolite in their bodies, which kind of sucks considering about 50 years ago pro was not even seen. Finding in line with previous research does not mean that they will all develop asthma. Just as smoking increases the risk of lung cancer, but not everyone who smokes gets lung cancer. Not every child exposed to BPA will develop asthma. Now here's the interesting part. They can't figure out how in the world it's causing asthma. The biological mechanism behind BPA asthma connection currently is unclear. The current study found no evidence that exposure to BPA increased the risk of the immune system would develop more antibodies to common airborne allergens. Other possible pathways may include changes to the innate immune system, but it remains open to question. Why even wait? Get rid of BPA today. Seriously. The new study builds upon existing evidence, linking BPA exposure to respiratory systems as well as to obesity, impaired glucose tolerance, behavioral issues, among a range of other health issues altogether. How much evidence do you need to support the removal of a dangerous chemical from the environment? All these people that say global warming, this or that, or save the whales, what the heck? Deal with the knowns. Here you have a known. BPA. It's bad. It's dangerous. It's easy to remove. It's a simple solution. Case closed. Get rid of it. But again, sometimes, what's the word? Never waste a good crisis. So sometimes crisis management has to do with managing crisis to produce. BPA should be gone. Simple, easy, done. But it's not. Alright, that's end. Another health research report. This 8th of March 2013. And I will catch you guys next week. And thank you once again